it's a rare, very rare, and possibly never heard of, that a randomly selected body of citizens that deliberate has got some power in a permanent fashion that is recognized by public institutions. There are also other experiments that are really interesting. They're trying to do something similar in the regional government of the city of Brussels. And also there are deliberative parties. So some parties, in particular one party, whose goal is to introduce public deliberation in the workings of the local institutions in the government, regional government of Brussels. So this party, I joined a few meetings, for instance, is not only internally deliberative, but takes upon itself the task of organizing deliberative assemblies and having one elected representative that brings the conclusions of the deliberative assemblies to the attention of the regional elected body of representatives. So this elected representative of the Agora party in Brussels is essentially a spokesperson for randomly selected citizens that this party puts together in a very complicated and really demanding political effort. So these are very interesting developments. And as you can see, none of them touches upon the constitution directly, but all of them seem to be changing the governance, the way politics are being done at different levels, by means, for instance, of the recognition of the role of randomly selected body of citizens in the working of the political communities in Belgium. Now, when we look also at the landscape of innovation, we see that the executive is actually very active in Belgium, and it has started a lot of the mini publics that we find, and this takes place at all levels of government. Also the federal government, so not just the local governments, but also the federal one is particularly keen on having deliberative meetings. And they don't do it directly. Another interesting thing is that they do it by collaboration with civil society or public administration. But I would say that civil society plays a key role. So there are organizations like the Fondation Roi Baudouin, that is a leading expert in the organization of these events, and it's often in charge of them. And also leading figures from the G1000 movement are often involved in the organization of mini publics. So there is an open channel with civil society actors. When it comes to topics, there's been a lot of a variety of topics, I would say, and it seems that environment, the territory, so what happens on the ground, and the population are the most popular one for deliberative forms of participation. Then we go into details about some of these mini publics, but I will skip those to you. And then we also talk about problems and challenges that might come up in the Belgian context. So I think Belgium is really interesting because it's really diverse. The communities are somewhat independent from each other, the Flemish and the Walloon and the German speaking. At the same time, they're not really in a harmonious relationship. So for instance, when it comes to the kind of constitutional change that we look at also in this cost action, well, Belgium is a really tough case. Reforming the constitution, it's really complicated. It's proven impossible to date. So we wonder now what's the ground there, the space there for deliberative forms of participation to break this deadlock that's been there forever. And also another interesting aspect is that populations seem really keen towards participatory deliberative forms of engagement, but there is a risk that if you don't get as much out of them, then perhaps you lose momentum. and call it populism, call it by other names. There is a lot of that going on in Belgium as well. So maybe the wave is very high at the moment, but we might not catch it, you know. There is resistance to it for sure. And then, yeah, these are essentially the main elements. And when it comes to future developments, of course, it would be hoped that the Flemish and Wallonian communities that are also very active would join a bit more this tide of new forms of participatory and deliberative democracy. And it's happening at the local level, but not at the regional level. So a lot of constitutional change is going to happen, if it's going to happen at all, at the regional level. So the three different parts of Belgium. Yeah, there is some gain. There are gains to be made that we need to make if we want some substantial deliberative reforms, both in Flanders at the Flemish level and in Wallonia. I think I can stop here, and I'm open for feedback and for discussion. I hope you could hear me decent, and apologies if that's not the case.
Yeah, was good enough to follow. There is some noise on the, but anyway, I think we understood. So I don't know, Daniela or Shulamit?
Yeah. Shulamit, would you like me to start? Do you want to start?
I will start with just one specific thought or comment that I had about the Ost-Belgian initiative or model. This Ost-Belgian model seems indeed very innovative and unique. I noticed 2 points that are very interesting for me. The first of them, that if I understood correctly, in the lottery, it starts from the age of 16. Also, very young citizens, 16 years old, can potentially be elected and be included in this model, which is quite rare and interesting. So, and I like that very much. I think it's rare in the you know, in the big picture around the world. This is very rare. A thing that I was wondering in regard to the Ost-Belgian model is the following question. The first stage is lottery. Like, I think that the process is very much like electing a jury in many states, yeah? And then there's a second stage. In the second stage, there is some elimination in order to have a balance of gender, religious, age, and so on. Did I understand correctly? Yeah? Okay, so there is some attempt to create a balanced, varied group. However, I think that one of the problems in this model that any conflict of interests remain hidden. I mean, potentially someone that has a very clear interest or is very prejudiced can get his or her way into this group and have potentially a lot of influence. But there's no way to guarantee there is no conflict of interest. What we do usually, typically, in situation where members of parliament or any other decision makers are involved in policy making. So I was wondering about that, if it was thought about. And also, just to understand, I understand that the model is rather precarious because it is not embedded in the constitution. So theoretically, it can, if the political situation will be changed next election, it can be eliminated, this model altogether. So that's my remark and questions.
Okay, that sounds good, and I can reply straight away or take another question.
I think reply to me, and then Daniela has a few more, I think.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, so the focus here is on the Belgian model, and you're right. So there is the lottery, and of course it's not taught. No, wait, 16 years old. So I think this was the result of an effort, so to speak, to bring a set of progressive democratic reforms in one model. So as you know, lowering the age for political recognition is part of many campaigns, and this was included. So yeah, I also think it's a positive one. As to the refinements that occurred during the lottery, of course, typically along with the deliberative trends, there is an effort to have certain components of society involved. That I'm aware of, no participant should hold a political office. This is a restriction. But other than that, I don't think there are restrictions. I might be wrong, but to the best of my knowledge, that's the only one. And well, in a way, it is and it is not problematic. As someone that studies social movements and democratic innovations, I can see how having activists that are really committed to one position and one position only can raise problems. On the other hand, also having citizens that are usually not informed, say, about political issues can be a problem in itself. So I think there is a problem there, but not big enough a problem to disqualify individuals from the right to be part to this event. Also because you take, a single individual in his or her position as a citizen. So you also hope that they work as they're expected to. So but I wouldn't say that it's smooth and without a problem. I just think that it takes a really substantial problem to disqualify people from participating. When it comes to it not being embedded in the constitution, I think you are definitely right. Yeah, there is the risk that the political picture changes altogether, and this will be get rid of. Having said that, I think it's been this decision has been arrived at through quite a consensual process. So something really major should happen for it to be cancelled. And on top of that, I think that if it gets cancelled, then there might be reasons for it. So I really hope it will not. But it's also, I think, upon us to show that this thing has merits for everybody. So if it's perceived as something partisan that benefits only one part, then probably it's not good that it gets shut down, but it's among the realm of possibilities. But I think the fact that this is occurring in the German-speaking community of Belgium is not by chance. I mean, the level and the nature of conflict there, it's quite different from the standard political community. So I wouldn't go as far as saying that there is a consensual culture over there, but let's say there is more way of understanding each other, also because it's very small.
Okay, thank you.
May I add one? You see, in Germany, we have the discussion, all the Länder, that at the local level, you can vote with 16. And in Austria as well, by the way, and in most of the Länder, you can vote with 16 at the local level and even at the regional level, not at the national. Mm. So that maybe it's an influence. It's close to the
Yeah, interesting. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
I just want to say that I really like the report. I found it to be really interesting. I think it's also a nice experience to read and learn more about what's happening in other countries. So I really enjoyed the presentation now. I have some questions or issues that I would like to kind of hear more about. First one is, in the report it's mentioned that referendums are prohibited as well as popular initiatives, and I was wondering, why is that the case, and what exactly is popular initiatives? Okay, so continue, and then you answer everything. Okay. The second issue is that the examples that are mentioned in the report, they seem to be focused on like physical meetings, and I was wondering if there's also online versions or online activities that are also deliberative or something like that. And finally, the third one, wait, because something you already mentioned, so I don't want to go into it. Yeah, about the mini publics. I saw in the report that it didn't lead to constitutional changes, and I understand also the complexity in relation to constitutional changes in Belgium. But I was wondering if there's any other impact that it had in regular legislation, policies, implementation, stuff like that. So these are my questions.
Yeah, sorry, which mini public in particular?
I actually saw that it was mentioned in the report that none of them led to constitutional changes, and I was wondering if any of them or some of them led to other changes.
Okay, yeah. Where do I start from? So referendums. So referendums are very common in many countries, but by no means in all of them. I do not think I do not know what were the ideas of the funding figures of the Belgian constitution to prohibit referendums, but some standard, I think, note of distrust towards direct democracy might have applied. And also, let's keep in mind that there are two at least very divided components, one of which could systematically outnumber the other one in Belgium. So perhaps if you rely only on the sheer power of numbers, one community could use referendums, for instance, to systematically win over the other one at the national level. So there might have been good reasons for cautions there. Popular initiatives, essentially, it's when you make a proposal and gather signatures for holding a referendum or having and then having a legislative discussion about a political proposition. So, for instance, popular initiatives are very popular in the United States. In each state, there are a lot of popular initiatives taking place every year. And many scholars find them extremely problematic because, for instance, they have the problem, the flow, that they can be easily led and dominated by powerful actors. So let's say you want to propose, I don't know, lowering taxes on tobacco, then you just make the proposal, gather the signatures, campaign, and perhaps win a referendum over there. So, you know, it comes with challenges, and I'm a bit more skeptical. I'm a bit skeptical when it comes to that, even though there are certain undeniable democratic values to it, direct democratic values. And then online participation. Well, a lot of participation we observe is converting itself in order to survive, especially the institutionalized forms really need to do that because otherwise it's difficult to keep these experiments going. Also, the Belgian model itself is looking in that direction. And the latest mini publics that I've heard of all have included a heavy reliance on the digital aspects, which I think poses altogether new challenges for deliberative democracy, because we've been talking about this forever. But one thing is to include this in the debate. One thing is to have deliberation that mostly occurs in digital, through digital channels rather than face-to-face. Constitutional change. Well, mini publics have not attained any constitutional change. That is true. and good luck anybody to attain constitutional change in Belgium. The king himself seems not to do it. But there have been a lot of policy decisions that have been affected, perhaps indirectly. So I cannot recall binding mini publics that have changed the law directly. I might be wrong, but I don't recall them. But for sure, many of them have informed policy decisions, and also the cultural side of things is important. Like the G1000 has really been a world first. So through this very civil society-based form of participation, we have assisted. After this form of participation, we have assisted to very similar experiments taking place in the UK, the Netherlands, in Spain. So the model has circulated. So yeah, I see a mixed picture there. There is still some way to go in order to have these bodies making binding choices, if that's deemed desirable at all, but it's not like they're completely irrelevant. I think that to sustain this level of innovation, or even to further it, then we need to see that these things lead to something. Thank you for your questions, and to both of you for the insight.
So thank you, Andrea, for your presentation.
Thank you very much.
And Shulamit and Daniela for your comments. I have several issues too, but I think to be strict on the time, maybe we can collect general ideas for a discussion later. I see Norbert face, probably he also wants to discuss this referendum against mini publics, or anyway, I think this is a very nice discussion, maybe for the cost action in a special event, not today. But anyway, I think it's very interesting, as you said, the experience, and there are many things to observe and see how it evolves. But yeah, now let's move to Georgia. So we have Bakar to present, and I don't know, Imants, I can't see you. I don't know if you have someone from Slovenia. Yes.
Yes, I'm from Latvia. I'm not presenting.
You are not presenting, neither.
I'm from Latvia, so.
Okay. No, it's just because we are missing people, and I didn't know if you were one of. So we don't have people for, officially assigned to comment your presentation, so we can do this all together, right? So.
Okay. Okay, so I hope you hear me very well.
Yeah.
So, okay, so since I have 10 minutes, I will try to give just a brief description of the, let's take, of Georgian experience of democracy and constitutionalism. Because in my report, I made quite critical analysis of the democracy in Georgia, what I call a neoliberal democracy, which is following the disintegration of Soviet Union, Georgia adopted this free market model based on shock therapy strategy. And all Georgian democracy, including constitutionalism, in practice is based on this ideal of the neoliberal values, which is a deregulation, minimal state, or the idea of like holy ideals of free market economy and so on and so on. But I would like to say that from the very beginning, in 1995, Georgian constitution introduced a presidential system. And it was because of the needs of the time political regime, because the time president of Georgia was ex-foreign minister of Soviet Union, Eduard Shevardnadze, and it was his own interest to bring a presidential system in Georgia. But Shevardnadze kept power until 2003, and then in 2003 there were the very famous dramatic events, what is called in recent history of post-Soviet states Rose Revolution, and this was the political event when radical liberal forces, in fact neoliberal forces, took power, and they monopolized the political authority, and they monopolized all the process of all the constitutional process. And what I mean is that after 6 or 7 years from Rose Revolution in 2010, when that time president of Georgia, who was eccentric leader with neoliberal views, Mikhail Saakashvili, when his second term was approaching to be over, and he understood that he could not run for a third term because according to Georgian constitution that was not allowed, and it's not allowed still. Saakashvili started a very large process of constitutional changes in 2010. So before in 2009, in fact, and before 2009, Georgian constitution really did not experience any serious changes almost. And in 2009, he created a special constitutional commission, which was in charge to prepare a new constitutional draft, which would guarantee or ensure to move Georgia's presidential system into parliamentary one. And that time there were lots of assumptions and lots of thoughts among the citizens of Georgia that that time he wanted to change political system in order to move for the position of prime minister in 2013. So people thought that he was imitating what Vladimir Putin did in Russia when he was replaced on the position of prime minister, but he was in fact the most powerful man in Russia, yes, when he wasn't the president during this interregnum period, yes. And so even in 2009, when the big process of constitutional changes started, there were lots of disagreements, and the political opposition and intellectual opposition was criticizing him because he was using this culture of constitutional changes to keep the power. And that time, actually, what I also underlined in my report, Georgian constitution was changed with very specific, unprecedented, and I would say anti-democratic article. In Georgian constitution appeared following article that state has no right to introduce new common taxes or to change common taxes apart from excise tax. So introducing new common taxes was a subject of referendum. So in fact, the parliament of Georgia and the state, let's say, was deprived to define the taxes. And you know that this is one of the most central functions in every democracy for parliament to define the tax policies, yes. And that time, this article in referendum appeared with great lobbying, with I would say powerful lobby of big financial corporations, because they wanted to keep the flat taxation. We have flat taxation in Georgia. We don't have a progressive taxation system, and flat taxation really works for big corporations. And it's one of the major ideal of the neoliberal ideology. Yes, not to raise taxes for rich and so on and so on. Yes, so in that time, on the level of constitution, this neoliberal economic ideology was legitimized. The government had no right to introduce new common taxes, and it was only subject of referendum. So in 2010, in fact, the constitutional changes, the formal process ended. But what happened is that in 2012, government political class changed in Georgia. The ruling political party, chaired by Saakashvili, lost power in elections of 2012, and in 2013, new political party reinitiated new constitutional changes in order to strengthen the process of transition to parliamentary system. So what I'm trying to say is that after 2012, when Saakashvili lost power, when we had new government, new political party, it was still in agenda of political life to move to parliamentary system and constitutional process strengthen. And first time in Georgia since 2013 until 2018 or even 19, even 20, I would say, first time in Georgia, the process of constitutional changes enjoyed the method of deliberative democracy. Before that, there was no such practice or such culture in Georgia. And in 2013, 14, and then especially in 2000, I would say especially 2017 was an important year for this deliberative democratic method introduced in the process of constitutional changes, because the ruling party decided to bring this draft into large cities of Georgia and to meet local students, teachers, I don't know, workers, and to discuss with them the draft of the constitution. But what was very interesting is that, and I wrote also in my report that there was the impression, and there is still such impression that despite of this fact that it is very welcome that the government used the deliberative method, it was rather formal ritual, because I mean the ruling party was talking to the people, they were listening their ideas, but in fact there was the impression that it was like carnivalization of the constitutional changes. And for example, one of the important topic during this public discussion in 2017 was this article of constitution which was about referendum and taxes. And the students and academics and the trade union activists and just ordinary citizens protested a lot, and they wanted to influence the government to change this article, which was inherited from the neoliberal system, or the previous neoliberal system. But unfortunately, this article still remains in current constitution of Georgia. It is in transitional provisions, but there is still this constitutional norm. However, it's written that this constitutional norm will not be valid after 12 years, something like this. It's already after 9 years, it will not be valid. But still, according to constitution, the state, the political institutions, the democratic institutions elected by people are not allowed to define taxes. And this actually article during this deliberative process was lobbied by Georgian civil society. So in fact, Georgian liberal civil society, in cooperation with big financial institutions, lobbied this article and played the role of neoliberal cultural forces, I would say. And I think Janina, just remind me when I'm, because I can really talk a lot about this topic.
Yeah,
so,
you can close in 1 minute. And then...
Okay, great. So I will try to finalize. The second unprecedented, or maybe there is a precedent, but it was quite rare. This was also undermined by Venice Commission. Actually, Venice Commission also undermined the taxes and referendum was very rare in comparative constitutional systems. The second principle which Georgian constitution today also has is that according to Georgian constitution, all structures and bodies, governmental bodies, must strive to integrate Georgia into European and Atlantic institutions, to NATO and the European Union. And this was kind of, it was a politically speculative norm, and until now it's quite lots of debates about this, because in fact, this norm, this constitutional norm, also functions in Georgia as a technique of social control. If you criticize NATO, then you are against the constitution, against will of Georgia. And this article actually was also lobbied by liberal civil society in cooperation with neoliberal political forces. So I don't know. I can stop here, and what I can say is that Georgian constitutional changes, the process of constitutional changes, always depended to the willingness and demands coming from the certain political regimes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think we have this case and North Macedonia also, which are a bit challenging for the action, because as you said, we don't have here like real institutions of citizen participation and deliberation. And this is one of the issues probably we have to discuss. But before opening the room for more comments, I have a key question on, you talk about the carnivalization of this process of public, I don't know if call it debate or information. I want to know, to ask you a bit more on how it was. If was really people had the opportunity to participate, everybody or whom, for how long, on which topics, and which kind of outcome. There is a piece of paper, something, documents registering the participation, or how it was?
The methodology was like this that in 2017, and even there was also another wave in 2019 and 20, even in this year. The methodology was like this, that during all constitutional changes, because we made lots of changes because of the parliamentary system, the ruling party and also some members of opposition from parliament left for big cities, and they met the local people, and they were allowed to express their opinions, to criticize, to reflect on very concrete articles. But when there was a very strong mobilization in Tbilisi against this article on taxes and referendum, the government and even opposition, they were all very stubborn to change this article, even though there was a very large social mobilization. I don't say that 2 or 3 citizens protested. Really, a lot of young people and students and academics united to fight against this article, because there are many student groups and academic groups who consider future of Georgia progressive taxation. And this article in Constitution does not allow government to think about progressive taxation. And by the way, it's very funny that Georgian liberal civil society, who considers itself to be a pro-European, they are against these ideas of welfare state, which comes from post-war Europe, yes? And that's why I say that there was impression that it was and to be honest, no opinions and no initiatives coming from local initiatives were taken into the consideration by parliament. Only several, and it was not local citizens initiative, it was local, I would say, liberal class initiatives, which was quite different from the needs of local citizens, at least in Georgia, in this country.
Yeah, thank you, Bakar. Any other has a question or comment on the case?
I have a question. I mean, it's quite fascinating calling something a neoliberal constitution. A liberal democracy, okay, but neoliberal is quite new. But you're right. I mean, this is typically Washington consensus, flat taxes, and exactly that case. And you're also right that this power of the purse and the fiscal policy is a privilege of the parliament normally, and there should be a chance to change it. But the question is there? I mean, this post-Soviet Union constitutions, and I would include even the Eastern Bloc and the East German constitution. I remember there were a lot of social rights included. Are they totally excluded in the new constitution as well? And the other question is, I mean, actually, I didn't get the 100%. How can you change it? You need 2/3 majority, and other changes for what kind of possibilities are existing? Maybe it's in the article. Sorry about that.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you. To start from second question, yes, you need like constitutional majority to change to make changes constitutional.
There is no chance. I mean, no.
Oh, almost. I mean, there are still discussions that maybe they will change this norm, or there are lots of actually debates about this. But the constitutional changes really needs the quite vast majority to be approved, and that's why it was always difficult process in Georgia to make a constitutional changes. Like Andrea mentioned that in Belgium it's quite always the constitutional reforms are not that easy, and the same is actually here. And the first question that was very interesting was what you asked about social, let's say about social guarantees. Yes? The Georgian constitution only says that Georgia is it is based both on the principles of liberal democracy and I could say principle of like welfare democracy, but there is only one point, and this point was introduced many years ago from the beginning, that Georgia is a social state. But that's all what Georgian constitution says about our welfare state. Actually, during this process of deliberative considerations in 2017 and 18, the group of activists also lobbied the article about housing and accommodation for all, about housing for all the citizens of Georgia. Because in Georgia we have this, I can say that we have this, the bankocracy, the banks are ruling in fact the economic life of this country, and lots of citizens are left without homes because they had credits, they could not pay credit. There is a really big drama. The Georgia, which was in Soviet Union probably the most flourished country, today is facing a serious economic crisis. And a group of some, I don't know, sociologists, urbanists, and so on, they prepared the article about housing for all so that nobody would stay in the street. and this was not also, let's say, the subject of political, let's say, decision. Yes, and the Social Democratic Party had also initiative to strengthen Georgian constitutional with the norms of welfare state, and that was also rejected by the ruling political party. And even though ruling political party positions to be anti-Saakashvili, so anti-previous government, which was a neoliberal, they are still hijacked with this neoliberal ideology. It's very difficult for them to escape. Even they understand Europe as a free market, not as a social market.
Yeah. Anyone has a comment? No? So then we can follow with the country report for Israel. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was really interesting. Shlomi, do you need to leave or? Okay. Yes, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the report that we had for democratic deliberation in Israel. I want to say it was really an interesting experience for us really to work on this report, and during this process we also had contact with different actors in government and academia to discuss with and learn from. And what the report, what we wanted to do with the report is to kind of see and present the emerging deliberative practices in relation to constitution making, but also to legislation and policy design in Israel. And generally speaking, this topic is very young and still underdeveloped in the Israeli context. We see initiation of different measures and proceedings only around, like starting during the 2000s and most of them also in the last decade. And these measures are still relatively weak and lack real impact, but they are promising in the sense that they are first steps towards advancing public engagement and democratic deliberations in Israel. So the first part of the report looks at Israel's constitutional framework, which is interesting in the sense that Israel does not have a codified constitution. Instead, it has a framework of what we call basic laws, which are laws that have semi-constitutional status. Israel was meant to have a constitution, but due to historical reasons, this never took place, and instead we have the basic law framework. This obviously creates a problem in the sense that not all constitutional measures, constitutional issues are anchored in basic laws, and basic laws do not include all relevant human rights. The historical background and reasons for this situation is also covered in the report, so I don't want to go into that too much. The report also presents three main initiatives for constitution making that aim to kind of reshape or present a new alternative for constitution in Israel. These initiatives, two of them are led by civil society organizations and academia, and one was initiated and was organized by parliament. All of them mostly focused on consensus making and how to reach agreements within the very diverse and conflicted sectors in the Israeli society. But neither of them were accepted or adopted as part of a constitutional change. But it did have an impact in the sense that it strengthened the aspects of public engagement in the sphere of constitution making and constitutional reform. Shlomi, do you want to
No, I think you did it in a comprehensive way. Nothing to add.
Okay. The second part is in the report concerns deliberative practices that relate to legislation and policy, because having an impact on constitutional level
Daniela, you froze.
is really hard, and it's can you hear me okay now?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So the report covers more examples that relate to public engagement in the spheres of legislation and policy design. Well, these are all mentioned in the report, so I don't want to go into too much in depth, and also because of time issues. But I want to give like a few examples that we thought were interesting from the legislation standpoint. In the recent years, the government adopted a decision in relation to reducing regulatory impact in legislation. And this requires that every government-led legislation must have a RIA report, regulatory impact assessment report, on the government-led legislation. And what's interesting is that the RIA methodology requires that for every government-led legislation, there is a participatory process and consultative process that has to take place. So this actually builds in participatory processes within the legislation and regulation drafting process. And so it is true that it's still relatively new, and it only applies to government-led legislation. But these, and also the consultation processes and their quality, of course, can differ within different ministry challenges that we need to tackle with. But it is, I think, a very promising step in the sense that it streamlines public engagement and deliberation within legislation. In relation to public engagement within, in relation to policy design and policy implementation, there's a series of government decisions adopted, in most of them in the past decades, that relate to aspects of public engagement and encouraging and strengthening government-public relations and trust. This resulted in the establishment of intersectorial roundtables that have taken place on different issues, and they combine the civil society, business, and government sector together. There's also cases of public engagement within public committees that are appointed to discuss a certain issue or give recommendations on a particular point, and they also have participatory processes with the public. And there's also a unit for public participation that has been established just recently in the past years, that is kind of a source of knowledge for public participation and deliberation with government. An interesting example is also the issuing of tenders that actually enable ministries to have to recruit and have positions that are focused on public engagement and participation within relevant ministries. So they work also within the ministry itself and also outside to the public and other ministries together. So that relates to policy. The third part of the report concerns youth in deliberative practices in Israel. The issue of youth participation is of particular interest to Shulamit and myself, and it's also something that I'm writing my PhD on, so it was very suitable for us to kind of have a spotlight on this issue. In relation to youth, it's important to say that there's no binding legislation that anchors collective participation of youth, so meaning minors, so under 18, in government or policy at the national level. There is some aspects relating to youth participation in municipal level, but nothing in the national level. And in recent years, mostly due to our recognition within government ministries on the importance of hearing the voices of youth on matters that relate to their lives, and we see more ad hoc consultations on different issues and policies. This too, I mean, it represents first steps, and some have been very good and beneficial also for policymakers and for youth that participated. But we still need more time to kind of assess and evaluate the impact that it has on specific policies, and also in relation to kind of societal views towards youth engagement. So that's pretty much it. I think that the conclusion is that, like, there has been more development in this field in Israel, but it's still it requires more work. Also, like in all these spheres that we discussed, so constitution making, legislation, and policy, and we need to kind of look at how we can streamline this within our existing practices. Yeah, so that's that.
Thank you, Daniela, and also Shulamit for writing the report. And Norbert, I think you are expected to give comments if you have, and if not, I have some.
It's not really a must. I mean, yeah, Janina, what?
Norbert, we can't hear.
I just heard about my new role, but I can give some comments, and perhaps please help me and assist me. Yeah, you see, thank you very much for the presentation. Actually, what is my question is, when it comes to the constitutional making and the processes. I mean, we have what I already asked for the case of Georgia. We have the typical problems when you have when you change the constitution. You normally, if you have two chambers, both have to agree. You need this 2/3 majority or even other quorums. I haven't read it properly, but that is also existing, I can imagine, in Israel as well when it comes to the constitution, that there are this kind of thresholds. And then the question is, you were referring to this commission in the early 2000s. You see, most of the new elements, although Belgium started already 2000 with the mini publics, but in fact, the hype came a bit later in most of the countries. And I remember I was in a conference on participatory instruments in the early 2000s in Brussels, and there was nobody talking about mini publics. There were a lot of people talking about participatory budgeting, but not about mini publics. And so the question is, early 2000 was probably too early for participatory instruments, and was there the idea, and maybe I missed that, to redo it again, to have a new convention on the constitution again, which could be more open and more deliberative in this regard. And
okay, I can write.
Yeah, and secondly, when it comes to policy making, of course, it's much easier if you do policy making than constitutional making, because there you have more possibilities. And then the question, but still, it is important to see what is going on here in the at the national level. And finally, you see, maybe I misunderstood that, but at the local level, I can imagine there are numerous forms of participatory instruments, because local level is laboratory for participation and democratic innovation, etc. And you have a lot of municipalities, and if you have a little bit of freedom and autonomy, you can, of course, test a lot of different things. But sorry, excuse me that I haven't read it properly, but that's what I understood from your presentation, Daniela. Yeah.
Thank you, Norbert. Very interesting remarks. I will start, and then if Daniela I'm sure she'll have things to add. About your first question, maybe we should do it again, like the Israeli Democracy Institute or some of the other bodies that initiated it. Well, I'm afraid, I mean, it is my prediction that if it will be done again, it will be even harder to reach consensus. I think that the divides that existed then in the Israeli society only deepened since then. And I think that the goal of achieving a constitution or constitution-like arrangement is slimmer now than they ever been. So I think that perhaps it's good that at least some attempts were made back then, but I'm not optimistic at all about new consensus that can be reached now. About your question about the municipalities, yes, of course, there's a lot of deliberation-like activities in municipalities, especially around construction policies and building and so on. We didn't get into that in the report, didn't we, Daniela? We didn't get into all these specific deliberation acts that take place every day in cities and municipalities. But I'm not sure that this sort of activities are usually induced by regulation that really makes it necessary to ask the public about certain issues. And I'm not sure this sort of issue is relevant to the report that we were drafting here, but we can think about it. And you had a third comment, which I don't remember.
It was you see the youth. Yeah, that was also at the local level. I mean, do you have also for other particular interest groups like old people, handicapped people? I remember you have something for the handicapped and people as well, or for regional sub-municipal councils. I mean, this kind of formally or informal instruments are also existing in a couple of countries.
Daniela, you have something in mind for old people or some special interest groups? Well, feminist groups have a lot of, plenty of organizations, but I wouldn't say that what they are engaged in is exactly deliberation. Of course, they are engaged in promoting their roles, their task, in encouraging discourse, relevant discourse, in promoting equality, but I wouldn't call that deliberation according to the agenda that we are dealing with this cost. Daniela, maybe you want to add?
I think I want to kind of go back, and then I'm going to talk about the other groups. You are right in the sense that 2000s and even 2010 and even in the past years, it's still relatively around the time that this is happening or emerging also elsewhere. So maybe Israel is not necessarily late or underdeveloped, but there is a difference in the sense that what is happening now with participatory mechanisms, they're not really high level when we're talking about the general public. For example, the intersectorial roundtables are really a good example in the sense that, like, they have they are very deliberative. They often have a shared or agreed upon output. The time of consultation is really early, so you can really make a difference on policy. But those invited to the roundtables are representatives of civil society organizations, business. So they're not the general public, the general citizens, and whatever. Those mechanisms or initiatives that are relevant for the public are generally not as a high level, but more consultation based or getting information. So like review and polls and stuff like that. So in that sense, I think that this is I think the main difference. The other issue that you mentioned about the municipal level, I think that it's true that there's maybe a bit more options there. That's true. But the options are also more limited because right now, at least, we're still, I think the government is very central. Municipal authorities, even the most rich and important ones, they don't have as much authority and decision-making powers in Israel. I think that could change, especially with the instability that we now have with government in general, and the inability of government to have any changes. Especially we see it, Shulamit, now with COVID, that municipalities are actually taking matters into their own hands and having policies and regulations that are for them and making really good changes. But generally speaking, if you want to have an impact, it needs to be in the government level because the municipal level is not as important. And with other interest groups, our focus was on youth, so that's what we had in mind. But I'm sure that we can have the same report, and instead of this chapter, have one on women or any other underrepresented groups, Arabic speaking, Arabic speaking, people with disabilities, and etc. etc.
So thank you. And now, we should move to North Macedonia and Slovenia. The presenters are not in the room. Andrea, you were expected to give some comments. I don't know if you want to do it, or if you want to say something about it, or
Okay, sorry, I had to unmute myself. Look, I wanted to discuss a bit with the participants, so if they're not there, maybe we can move on. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, of course, it's nonsense to discuss things which are addressed to them. What I think could be interesting, but we can do this later after the final, is how, the different cases fit. Because as I said before, in these two cases, in fact, we don't have really experiences of participatory deliberative democracy, and the focus of the work in the country reports is more on how constitutions are changed and on the risk. I think it's meaningful, of course it is, and it's very interesting and to somehow connects with the Georgian discussion, and maybe we can devote, 5-10 minutes, because then there are also like general questions which I have also thinking on your presentation, for instance, on if we know if people support participation in general, yes or no, which kind of incidence this has, or you talk about populism, which I think we can also maybe at the end discuss. 2 minutes, please, and institutionalization. But if we agree, then we move to Germany and.
Yeah, let's finish with Germany then, and perhaps we can start a conversation with that comparison and go on.
It would be nice at the end to have a discussion, even what is the influence of COVID-19 now on all these instruments and so on. There are a lot of questions. Yeah, okay, thank you very much. I didn't understand the topic 100%. So I thought I read this paper on Ireland, and Ireland is a masterpiece of participatory constitution making and the best practice and so on. So I tried to focus very much on the constitution making process, not at the local level, because we excluded that. There are so many in Germany. We have so many examples at the local level that I said this is probably not interesting, or it is going too far. But if you want, I can say 1 or 2, 3 words, and I have some publications on that at the local level, and I will do that. But let me first start at the national level, and to understand the constitutional making process, and is also to see how the development of the constitution in Germany happened. Because it was post-war, it's a little bit like post-socialist, because you had a strong influence from the Western power in Western Germany, and they didn't want, for example, social rights in the constitution. Although there was a strong pressure from the citizen. There were, at that time, in the 45, 46, 47, there were more people left-wing and more oriented towards social areas, but that was not on the agenda. And actually, they didn't want to have a referendum in it. The early constitution, you could see, they had referendums, and I'm talking later on the regional referendum of Northern Westphalia and Bavaria. They had referendum included, but the later on had nothing like that, because they said, we don't want that. That's too tricky. That could be it could bring us into problems. So what happened? The German constitution at the national level was a latecomer. First, we had the constitution at the regional level. The German constitution was only a basic law because it had a temporary situation. They still thought there will be a kind of unification. So in Western Germany, they said we have only a basic law and nothing permanent. And then in 1948, there was a meeting of experts and prime ministers from the 16 different Länder. And they decided and they developed a constitution, which was very much, of course, influenced by the allies from the Western allies, let's say. And then in the second part, there was a parliamentary council in September, May 1949, where 65 delegates appointed by the Länder agreed on this Grundgesetz, how we call it, on this basic law. And that is different. I mean, I don't know I'm not a constitutionalist 100%, but I know something about constitutional referendum, etc. But the German Grundgesetz has included at the beginning human rights. It has a preamble which focuses on human rights, and it has some articles strongly focusing on human rights. And these they have an eternal guarantee. So they have, we call it, they are so principled, you cannot change it, this kind of human rights. And that was very important after the Second World War, of course, that you include this kind of dignity and the civil rights and in this constitution without the possibility to change this. And they are highly respected. Actually, we had in Germany a very big trust in our constitution. The people are proud that there is this Grundgesetz and that it is very democratic, although it has no social components in it. The GDR constitution, Eastern Germany, had very strong social rights. In the Western part, there are no social rights. Nothing on housing, nothing on, and sometimes you have a free education, sometimes in some of the Länder constitution, but nothing else. Anyway, it has a kind of social welfare state that is predicted, and that is included. But no concrete social rights when it comes to special interests. Yeah, we had for the constitutional review this 2/3 majority, fully parliamentary process. The two chambers have to agree. And then what is important, and this is where the civil society comes in, as usual in parliaments, you have committees. We have a strong committee system. Committees are normally, but they are not open to the public, so not transparent. But here they invite special interest groups like trade unions, churches, chambers, economic interest groups. They can come into these hearings, but it's not public, and then they discuss it and bring in their ideas. And then you change certain regulation, and which are also changes of the constitution, by the way. And we had some strong, important changes. For example, that we have a re-armification. We got an army in the 50s. We had no army after 45 because of good reasons. And then they reintroduced the army, which immediately became part of the NATO. And then also other things were on fiscal federalism, etc. Strong 60 constitutional amendments, quite a lot. I mean, if you compare that you have this, I mean, because it's temporary only. but nothing with a referendum. There was also not in 1945. There 45 there were 1950 there was no 48 there was no referendum on the constitution, and also not 1990 with a reunification. There was nothing, no referendum, nothing at all, not even a discussion of the constitution, and no inclusion of the socio-economic rights from the GDR into the Western Grundgesetz. So that was very much a kind of what we call corporistic style of politics. You have the big trade unions, but also the strong influence by the employer association, etc. So this corporatist style of politics. Nothing where civil society could immediately come in. There was in 2090, there was an idea, and before that you had it in policy fields, but in 2019, from the invited space, from bottom up, there was a group which called More Democracies, called Mehr Demokratie. They said, we want a kind of citizen assembly on the future of democracy. And they included, that was very strategic, they included the president of the parliament, Christ Democrat Conservative Party, and the main party at that time, Social Democratic leader. And they both supported this group, and then it was sponsored. So they had a kind of randomly selected citizen assembly in 2019, where they discussed certain topics, how to reform the constitution, and how to bring in new ideas like lobby registers, where the lobby groups have to be transparent, other forms of referendums, more participatory portals for policy making, etc. And this was taken up by the parliament later on, and they want to discuss it. And partly it was discussed, as I understood it, in the meantime in the parliament. But some of these topics were very toxic, like the lobby transparency, for example. That was a quite toxic topic. This is a national level. At the regional level, at the 16 Länder, we have very much we have a little bit a different picture. The Länder had an anniversary of their constitution a bit earlier. So in one state where I'm living, North Rhine-Westphalia, 16 million people, it's quite big, and we had the constitution was built in 1947 without a referendum as well. There was there was a referendum in 1950 on that constitution, and then we had a couple of amendments, 20 amendments, but these were only in the parliamentary process. And then, there is no obligatory referendum on the regional constitution of the state of North Rhine-Westphalia. And what happened, after 70 years, there was a process in 2013, and for 3 years, where they wanted to, because of the anniversary, they wanted to reform this old constitution. And they had certain topics on the referendum, on constitutional court, on finance, on debt ceilings, etc. And it was they said, we want to make it open and transparent, but in fact, it was a total failure. They had some online instruments, but they were not advertising these. So there were no participants, more or less. They had a lot of emails bringing in, but it was very few. Remember, this was in 2013. So there could be more, could have used more instruments. And in this, what we called Enquete Commission, they discussed it internally, and they had some experts hearing, etc. But finally, it was not really a success, and they were very, very small. They couldn't find compromises between the party. There was no real change, and very small little items were changed in the constitution. And the biggest thing what they wanted to change was a new threshold for new parties coming into the local level, and that was not discussed in this constitutional change process. That was discussed, taken apart, and 2 years later, the parliament, or 1 year later, the parliament decided on this to implement 2.5 threshold at the local level, which would have included all the smaller parties, not only right wing, also from the middle, from the left, and from other areas. And this was a kind of privileged party. We are in, we don't want the smaller parties in. So what they did is they introduced it, but the constitutional court of our province said, no, this is unconstitutional. You cannot change the constitution this way. And so it was sacked and it was not implemented in the constitution. But this caused, of course, a lot of cynicism, and the people said, here you have this big process and nothing happened, and then you want to bring it from the back door, your own things, and that was not good for local democracy or for regional democracy and German democracy at all. But in fact, not so many people cared about this process anyway. The second one, which was important, and there are a couple more Länder, Thüringen in East Germany, by the way, is pushing it more than Western Germany, but the state of Hesse, which is Western Germany as well, had a referendum, had a process from 2015 for 3 years. And the Hessian constitution was one of the earliest. It has an obligatory referendum if you want to change the constitution. But it had one problem. It still had included, and that was changed, changed just recently. It had the death penalty in. So even in some years ago, we still had a constitution where the death penalty was included, and they were afraid to change the constitution by a referendum because they said, "Oh, maybe some people will vote for the death penalty," although it was illegal according to the Grundgesetz and the national referendum, a national constitution. What happened? There was a process in 2003 to 2005 to change all this and get rid of this death penalty, but that stopped because they said, no, you don't want to do that, and they couldn't find an agreement. And then it was redone again because of the 7th anniversary of the Constitution, 2015 until 2018. And here some smaller changes existed, and it was much more transparent. You had parallel civil society council, not randomly selected, but appointed more or less. And the big like stakeholders, the big interest groups, but also smaller, not only the employers, but also other institutions were included. Universities and schools had it on the agenda, so it was a bit more transparent. Digital tools were more or less a failure and didn't work properly, but it was, at least they tried to implement them. And what was happened is that, for example, they lowered the threshold for referendums. They lowered the voting age, for the passive voting age, which was 21 down to 18. In fact, they had before, Hesse had for local election, and they had reduced it to 16, and then they went back to 18. So they had to redone it twice even. Then there were other things included, like big state targets, like sustainability or sports as a goal for the state to fulfill. That was also part of the constitution. But in fact, most of the items were smaller topics. Nobody was so much interested in this kind of topics. And what happened, it was a compromise between the political parties. Some of the parts where the smaller parties wanted to bring in no re-election or only 2 terms for the prime minister, although he's indirectly elected. They want to introduce that, but that was not included, and other smaller items were not included. For example, the inclusion of social rights or housing were not included. That was brought in by the Linke, by the left-wing party. And anyway, it was a little bit better one because it was more transparent, and it was a much better process than the one in North Rhine-Westphalia, which was a kind of strategic party game. So that was everything on constitutions. And if you want later on, I can 1 or 2 say about what happened at the local level. Thank
you, Norbert. Very clear and interesting as well. So now we have, I don't know, Bakar, Daniela, if you want to comment. Bakar, do you want to start?
Yes, thanks. Thank you. That was really very interesting and impressive talk, and quite comprehensive, despite of the short time. I have one question about When it's about making constitutional changes or holding referendum, for example, how is about the process of debate among the various political parties? Because we know that Germany has a very rich traditions of the ideological discrepancies among the various political parties, but now we live in an age of ideological crises. Yes? Are there any ideological discussions or polemics when it is about making referendum, for example, or certain topics? Or are there mostly technocratic debates? This is what I would like to hear. Thank you.
Yeah, you are right. I mean, when it comes to this kind of constitutional debates, you realize that it's not so interesting for most of the people. I asked my students when there was this one in North Rhine-Westphalia, have you heard about this constitution process? And nobody said, they all said, no, we have never heard about that this is happening. Which maybe it is a mistake by the regional parliament that they didn't make more advertising. That was one mistake. But you are right, it is very strategic, and it varies, especially when there is a kind of referendum included, it is very strongly conservative because they only allow certain topics. On the other side, when it comes to the state of Hessen, you could see that all the parties had their privilege, they had some ideas where they wanted to go, where they wanted to be more, in your sense, more neoliberal, or where they wanted to be more left wing, but all of them had to step down, and it was a kind of compromise here because they realized we have to change the constitution in Hessen because we want to get rid of this death penalty. Well, really a shame, I mean, that you still have a constitution like that, and which was never used, by the way, of course, because it would contradict national legislation. But here you see it is a lot of strategic discussion. And it was a lot of, they used this strategic discussion sometimes too much, as in the case of North Rhine-Westphalia. But you could also see the big parties, including the Green Party. They were all supporting, for example, this threshold. Only those parties which were becoming smaller and smaller, like the Liberal Party, they were getting a little bit nervous, and they said, no, we don't want this kind of threshold. But it was a big discussion, and you have at that level you have this typical trap where you have to change the rules for your own parliament, and you don't want to change it if it's contradicting your own interests. You know what I mean? This is a typical. So they are all parliamentarians. They don't want to change rules where they got rid of their influence, which is right. Typical in this regard.
Right. Thank you.
Daniela, do you have a comment? No? Andrea? No? Okay. We don't need to write conclusions, nothing like that. So we can maybe, as I said, if you want to take 10 minutes to talk about general issues. And yeah, I think there are two different axes, which maybe we can discuss later with the other members of the action. One is related to what we do with the reports in terms of content, because I see a lot of diversity, which of course is contextual related, because we have countries where there are experience of deliberation and others where there aren't. And I don't know exactly how we will deal with this idea of a country report when we have places where they don't have this kind of institutions or processes of participation. And the other more general issue is related to how we measure incidents, how we measure popular support for these experiences. I think, Andrea, you talked, for instance, on the Belgium case about this wave, the high moment in which these mini publics are, and I don't know if we have some kind of indicators proving that people knows and what it shows and what we can learn from that, how this relates also to incidents, how people value this kind of processes, because there's I think time also has to be considered. You know, we know, for instance, for the studies on participatory budgeting, that initially were highly popular and everybody was supporting that, and after 15, 20 years, many people, scholars, and also the population thinks that are not really useful, or depends again of the context, but that's part of a discussion, right? And then the other interesting thing, well, two more. The connection between populism and these processes of participation. I think on the side of referendums it's quite clear. Bakar, you talk about that, and we all know for many other cases that there is a risky connection between referendums and populism, but what happens with these other more mini-publics or deliberative experiences? And the last is on institutionalization. Because this was one of the topics for the case of Israel, but what we see is that in general there is no institutionalization on these specific mechanisms we are dealing with. Referendums, clearly, yes, are in constitutions, but when we talk about mini-publics, I think it's very rare the cases in which this is introduced, and we can also ask how this could be introduced.
I have another question to add. I mean, it's to Andreas' presentation and the Belgian cases. You see, you mentioned the different. It's what I use this concept of invited and invented space. So when it's invented, it's really bottom up. You have civil society bringing it in, but then the invited space would be that the state produces it and says, "Here we have now a mini public. Please use it," like what we had in Ireland, for example. Is there a difference when it comes to the effects and to the impact of them? I'm sure there is a difference that would be into question. And then the question is for me, I mean, this is extremely small, the mini publics, because I know them, what I'm referring here for example, the German, the Bürgerrat, we had 150. That is it's a little bit more than if you have only 2,000 people, which is really a council, no? Which is very difficult to find any kind of representativeness. If you want to have a single-headed household, women included, I mean, then she's probably overrepresented already, although that's a big group. I mean, you know what I mean? It's very difficult to get any kind of representativeness. So what is the impact? Is it different when the King's Foundation is starting it, or when the region of is it different?
Okay, well, maybe I can get started. And so I took note of your remarks, but first just a couple of words on what I read about Slovenia and North Macedonia. Essentially, both reports seem to suggest that there is not so much going on, and so they do a good overview of the history, within which participatory and deliberative democracy and constitutional change needs to be understood. But as a matter of fact, there is not much happening. What struck me about those two cases is that they really insist on the historical side of the analysis and the legacy of their democratization as an element that explains what's going on, which is not something we do either in Belgium or in Italy or many other countries. So I see there potential for collaboration between scholars working on those countries that have a sensibility that probably it's not as widespread when it comes to historical concerns. With regard instead to your remarks, let me see, I took note of them. I would start with Norbert's points. Well, thank you for your considerations. And let me start with invited and invented spaces. Luckily, there is no shortage of either one in Belgium. So what can I tell you? And there is some research going on in there, is that invited spaces seem to grant some policy effect, even though it's not major. So some limited policy change is sort of embedded with an invitation to an invited space. So the cultural effect, the systemic one, on the other hand, doesn't seem to be as profound. I don't know where lies the problem there, but they really seem to not to reach out to the wider population as much. On the contrary, the invented spaces, take the G1000, seem to lead nowhere in terms of policy impact. Yet they have a different political impact, which is first in civil society. So I wouldn't say that deliberative democracy is a popular concept in Belgium nowadays, but certainly it's much more familiar to people than in other European countries. Starting from my own, where not even elites know about deliberation almost. And also, speaking of elites, in terms of political sensibility, as of today, every Belgian political party has dealt with the issue of deliberative democracy, has made a proposal, has taken a stance. That has been empirically tied to the success of the G1000 as a public event. So perhaps I see a dichotomy. In invited spaces, you have policy impact of some kind, but not cultural one. And the contrary is true for invented spaces. The issue of the size, I'm not sure whether I get exactly what you mean, but for sure, with the German-speaking community, we are dealing with a very small sample of universe of reference, you know. So I think you can still sample and have a meaningful selection of citizens. But of course, you can also do a bit more direct democracy, I mean, when it's such small numbers. But if you were pointing out a problem in particular, then perhaps rephrase it, because I would like to say more about it. Maybe I can. There were also remarks about populism. Populism is definitely on the rise on the right side when it comes to Flanders, and that seems they seem not to care about deliberation, essentially, and have a more authoritarian understanding of the state, which is not deliberative friendly, but they haven't even opposed it, I think, in a meaningful way yet. And we can see in the southern part of the country, in Wallonia, there are radical left parties that are of a remarkable dimension. And over there, they seem very open to participatory ideas, which they do not always see as synergetic with deliberative ones. So, I don't know, the more radical parties might not be necessarily good news for deliberation, but on the other hand, if deliberation has to do something about contemporary democracy, then it has to be capable to deal with populism, not the other way around. I wouldn't expect populists to bring about deliberative democracy, but it's us having to address the problems they bring to the attention of democratic systems. As for measurements, luckily in Belgium there is a lot of research going on, and a lot of scholars, young scholars, are tracking down the numbers, and also studying citizen perception about deliberation. My sense is, by reading these papers, is that there is general ideological support for the values that underpin democracy and deliberation, but lukewarm support at best for public deliberation. So, yeah, the evidence, it's not overwhelmingly in favor, I would say, of favorable to the deliberative wave. But studies are ongoing, and I expect that in the next few years, Belgium will be well studied in terms of what's going on and how people react to all this innovation.
May I add one question, Andrea? Andrea, yeah. Anderlecht is, they had a participatory budgeting process, Janina, what you mentioned, where 10% of the budget, I mean, that was different to a lot of participatory budgeting processes in the world, I must say. 10% of the underlying budget was reserved for participatory budgeting, which is substantial. But this was, as I understood, this was not a citizen, a mini-public. It was not a citizen jury or anything like similar.
It had elements of deliberation, but it was not a mini-public. As is often in my understanding, I wasn't there studying the case itself, but for what I read. And that's not unusual. Participatory budgeting are more and more hybrid, but they're not deliberative like a mini-public.
So what are they? Everybody can participate in the participatory budgeting process?
Yeah, there are different stages of it, and the preliminary one, the initial ones are open to everybody essentially, and everybody means the usual suspects. If you do some good outreach, then you get someone else involved, but that's about it. And then in some cases, you can have citizens electing their own, among those who participate, electing their own representatives, or randomly selecting the representatives that will go to the next stage of discussion with authorities. That's far from being the norm, but it happens sometimes. I don't think this is what happened in Antwerp, but maybe there was some ground for that, but I don't recall this taking place in that case. But you know, I very much welcome the the openness to participatory reform, because you know it's a sort of our cousin, so to speak.
So yeah, I don't know, Bakar, if you want to say something more about Slovenia, or Daniela, something in general, or Andrea, Norbert, or on the opposite?
Well, I can say very shortly about Slovenia because many years ago I studied there and at University of Ljubljana. And what makes actually big difference between Slovenia and Georgia is that Slovenia adopted completely different paths of transition, and it is also underlined in constitution. Slovenian constitution is not has nothing to do with neoliberal principles, but it is mostly social democratic project, let's say, which then Georgian constitution makes it completely different. So and when I teach my students, I often give example of Slovenia as a successful transition of political and economic transition, which is not case of Georgia and then many post-Soviet states, I would say.
Daniela?
I just want to say I think that we're almost finishing up, so I just wanted to thank everyone and just to say from my perspective, it was really nice to speak and hear your comments and learn from your experience and from your countries. So I want to thank you for that.
Yeah. So yeah, thank you, and let's meet in another online meeting till the situation changes.